So tonight's talk is the third in a series on the Apāmāṇa, or limitless attitudes. They're more commonly referred to by their other name in the text, which is the Brahma Vihara, or the divine abodes. I like the term Apāmāṇa because to me, it actually points very concretely to some descriptive features of them so that we can kind of hone in on what the texts are trying to point us to. The limitless attitudes are, in the Buddhist teachings, in the Pali text, there are these ways of relating to the world that you cannot have too much of. This is what makes them limitless. Buddha said essentially, if you want to orient your mind in a way that will feel good, right, that will bring you peace, that will reverberate in positive ways in your environment, you can trust that these ways of relating to the world will do you no harm. You can take them to their extreme. You can include everything in the world within these attitudes, and you'll be okay. In fact, you'll be more than okay. Right? You'll be as if resting in the state of the gods. So these are the limitless attitudes. And there are four of them, and I'll just go over the four, and then I'll go over the one that I'm going to talk about tonight. So the four are metta, which I'm going to use the translation of goodwill. Karuṇā, and I'm going to use the translation of caring. Mudita, rejoicing. And upekkha, equanimity. Metta is wanting the best for everyone. Karuṇā is being present, really open to the pain and difficulties that others experience, being there for that. Mudita is being present, caring about the joys that others are experiencing, being touched by that. And equanimity is being present for all of it, being able to hold both the joy of others, pleasure and beauty, and the pain of others, difficulty and suffering, all at the same time, having space for that whole mix. And these are the limitless attitudes. Can't have too much, according to the Buddha. For those of you who've been following along, I've tweaked the definitions a little as I've gone. Because the more I'm reading and the more I'm studying, the more I'm understanding that this word limitless is really essential. So many of the things that we confuse for these attitudes can be taken too far. Right? So metta is sometimes called like a friendliness and has a little bit of a moving towards. I'm going to wave at somebody every day. But there are times when that's inappropriate. Right? There's just a little too much of that, right? Going into a funeral and glad-handing everybody might not be quite resonant. But stepping into a space where people are sad and wishing well for them within yourself, can't do too much of that. Similarly, karuṇā, caring. And I'll get into it more, but it often is translated as compassion, which has a little bit of a like, and I want to fix it, right? And I want to alleviate it. And there can be a danger in that. That can be overdone. Similarly, mudita can be confused with celebrating, right? Where you're actively inserting yourself into the situation of others' joy, as opposed to just being happy for them, right? So part of what really makes these special is that they're happening within you. They're a way that you are relating to the world. Not what you're doing to the world, but how you're relating to it. So I've been working backwards. I started with upekkha, and then I did mudita, and tonight we're going to do karuna. And as I mentioned a moment ago, I think karuna might not be totally well served by this term compassion. Gil Fronsdale, teacher in the same tradition, in the Theravada tradition, insight tradition, who I have a lot of respect for, who's written a lot on Buddhism, has wonderful books, great recordings online. He wrote an essay on karuna, pointing out that there's really no substantial evidence in the Pali text that compassion is the definition. Or even that it's used in a situation where compassion could be inferred from its use. And I promise that this won't all be an academic talk tonight, but I want to get this squared away first. In fact, the only sort of definition that you could really infer from its use is that it's the opposite of cruelty, right? Whereas cruelty would be sort of taking joy in someone's pain. Karuna is its opposite, being touched by it, right? Receiving it. Or cruelty could be wanting someone's pain, and karuna could be not wanting someone's pain, wanting somebody to not feel that pain, wishing that it were not so. Tricky thing about that word compassion is that usually in English it means not only caring about somebody's pain, but wanting to do something about it. There's a little bit of an extra. And maybe that's not how you use compassion, and that's fine. But I want to differentiate it from any definition that has a, I'm going to go try to fix this. Because in that way, we can sort of slip into hubris or codependence or a savior mentality, all of which are not limitless attitudes. They have their limits. But there's a tremendous value in just wishing that people not be in pain. It's an amazing way to move through the world. And when you carry that attitude, when you fully embody that attitude, other people can hear it and feel it. Right? They can sense that they are around somebody who does not wish for them to suffer. And it feels good to be around people who really don't wish any suffering on us, who in fact wish that we be relieved of it, even just in the way they carry themselves. You create a space in which people feel safe to share pain, feel able to be with their pain because they know that there's somebody in that space with them who cares. So it does feel good to be in the presence of karuna. Jonathan Faust, Tara Brach's husband and a longtime teacher of mine, when he's teaching people how to do relational work, will often say, sort of, imagine yourself on the edge of the woods with a small animal that's terrified peering out at you. Like, how would you hold yourself? Right? And it's really sort of a softening back, right? Not a trying to reach it or to fix it, just a, hey, I'm here, I see you, I care. Right? And maybe that animal stays and looks at you for a moment and then runs away, or maybe it comes out, but you're not placing any burden or expectations on it. You just are letting it know you see it, you care. And often the way that the Apāmāṇa or Brahmavihara are taught is sort of in this positive cultivation way. Like, hey, cultivate more compassion. Or as I'm going to use it tonight, cultivate more caring. Just care more. But I think that's not how the Buddha taught it, and I think it's a trap. You can go around all day telling yourself to care, but what you will find is that actually what that tends to do is sort of slap this extra layer of dialogue and self-judgment on top of all the feelings that you were having anyways. So it's sort of an exhausting kind of attempt at piety that doesn't really work. This is my experience, and the experience of a lot of students and clients of mine. I like to think of it the other way. What stops us from caring, right? In big and small ways, what gets in between us and really just genuinely wishing for every single being we encounter that they not be in pain? Because it happens all the time. If you really get honest with yourself, there are so many moments of the day when you are either indifferent to other people's pain or actively rooting for it. Certainly indifference, and maybe more often than we'd like to admit, actively rooting for it. And what gets in the way of our caring is the same thing that gets in the way of our mudita, our rejoicing, and the same thing that gets in the way of our metta, our goodwill. It's our fears and our desires, the things we want and the things we really don't want. So we'll start small. I'll use myself as an example. It's a common one, but there are times when my children are delaying going to bed. They're asking for an extra story or an extra cup of water, or coming up with a reason that it's not time to turn the lights off, or deciding that actually at that moment there's a long story that they have been waiting all day to tell me. And sometimes there's a long story about something confusing or scary or painful that happened at school that day. And this is the first time they feel like they can tell me. And I can even sense that they're suffering a little bit. And I don't care. I just want them to go to bed because I am exhausted and I want to go to bed. And I'm afraid, in fact, that if they don't go to bed and I don't go to bed, I'm going to be a mess at work tomorrow, and I'm not going to be a very good therapist, and then I'm not going to make enough money, and the whole thing's going to go to hell. And so in that moment, I don't care. Maybe on some deep level I do, but that's not the outer layer of what I'm experiencing. It's an indifference. That's what gets in the way, right? Those desires and fears. Now, and I'll come back to this a few times, but might as well just start with the cure right off the top. The cure is for me to notice what's going on inside of myself. If I have a moment to pause and realize that I'm tired and that I'm scared about the next day, that all this stuff is building up in me, I can soften. And even just saying that to you, I feel a little softness and tenderness coming in. Because what I'm actually doing then is opening up Karuṇā internally. I'm starting to care about myself. I'm noticing my own pain. And in noticing it, that Karuṇā, the limitless attitudes, you can't force them, but they seep in. They seep into the open spaces. As soon as you bring mindfulness and collectedness to your fears and desires, there the limitless attitudes are just infusing your being. And so as soon as I touch into my own fears and desires, there's that Karuṇā, there's that caring. And then it's so easy to turn back to my daughter or my son or my other daughter and just say, oh, tell me about that. Or even, I really want to hear about this. It sounds awful. Can you tell me in the morning, right? Because I'm actually too tired to give you the time you need. Whatever that response is. But suddenly I care. I care about me. I care about them. It can be more intense too. For those of you who watch sports and get really into sports, sometimes you can be rooting for your team to beat the living daylights out of another team, right? There's a little bit of cruelty in that. It's no fun losing, right? It's no fun getting humiliated on national television. We don't even think about that often when we're rooting for one team, right? It's just all winning and losing. We want that feeling of joy and rah-rah, and there's a indifference to the sort of experience of the people playing the sport. It can get even more intense. You can root for, a quarterback to get hit from behind and really crunched. Or if you've ever, I couldn't decide whether I was going to. There are some cities on the East Coast that if you attend their sporting events, there's a cruelty in it. They sort of want the opposing team to feel bad. They want so badly for that feeling of being big and being strong and being on the winning team that it festers into a kind of hatred of the opposing teams. Or it can be wanting somebody in the realm of politics who we feel like is doing great harm, wanting them to be gone so much from the realm of politics and wanting to be safe and wanting things to be better that we wish ill upon them. Or we're not sensitive to their pain when we find out that they've been publicly humiliated or encountered some difficulty, right? There's a desire for more of that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You suffer, right? That's cruelty, wishing pain. And that can be released the same way, just noticing how badly you want things to be better, how powerless you feel, how hard this is. It can soften, right? And you can say, okay, I don't want this person or their family to be in pain, but I would like them to be gone, right? Fine. But the cruelty is gone now. And it feels better inside, right? The Apāmāṇa feel better than their opposites, right? Rejoicing feels better than jealousy. Caring feels better than cruelty. Goodwill feels better than ill will. For you and for whoever the object is, always. This is an eternal truth that the Buddha hypothesized, and I have yet to find that it is incorrect. There can be the impulse to hurt people too. Maybe a coworker takes credit for some work you've done, and there's an impulse to get them back in a way that's going to show them, right? Or show somebody else, or humiliate them, or embarrass them. Or in my case, maybe a child or a pet has been not listening to me repeatedly for a length of time, and it's getting later, and there are more things piling up on me, and more getting stressed, and I want to scream at them so that they feel just how stressed I am on the inside, and somehow that by having that pain resonate in their little being, that things will get better. I want that. That pain and the hurting almost feels like a tool at my disposal, right? So there's a cruelty there, right? This sort of old biblical idea of punishment, right? That if we can somehow inflict the pain we're feeling on other beings, that it will make things better and safer. But to come back to that most famous quote in the Dhammapada, this doesn't work. No, that's not how the quote goes. The quote goes, hatred is not appeased by hatred, but through love alone does it cease. It doesn't work. No matter how many times we try to fix something by inflicting the pain we're feeling on somebody else, it doesn't work. There's a lot of talk these days too about sort of caring in the grand sense, you know, caring about society, caring in the political domain, right? Caring about the world, social upheaval, ecological disaster. And if, you know, caring is on this side of the spectrum and cruelty is on this side of the spectrum, then indifference is somewhere in between the two. It's definitely not Karuṇā, right? And people will say, well, you know, I get to a certain point where I just can't take it anymore. It's not good for me. And I think there is wisdom in that. And it doesn't mean we have to stop caring. And I think it can be easy to sort of lean into a head in the sand approach or shut it all down approach, right? Because in some ways we're struggling to care but not be overwhelmed. So I want to talk about that a little bit too. Why is it that sometimes it's really hard to hold this space of caring about people suffering, really wanting them to not be in pain, without getting overwhelmed by it? Right? If this is really a limitless attitude, it must be something we should be able to do limitlessly. And I think the key here is this concept of empathy, that human beings have this ability to emotionally resonate with others. And you can, in fact, have too much of that. It's different than caring. It's that feeling of when somebody cuts themselves with a knife in your presence, you go, "Ooh," right? You tense up against the imagined cut to your own finger, right? Or when somebody tells you a really embarrassing story, the way you might feel that embarrassment rising in you as you hear it or want to cringe, right? It's what makes watching that show for me, Curb Your Enthusiasm, so unpleasant, right? I'm just resonating with that discomfort. Empathy is something you can have too much of. You can let too much of other people's emotions in. That is not the same as caring. And for a lot of us, it's hard to read the newspaper or think about politics or think about ecological destruction without having sort of overwhelming empathetic resonance. So we become indifferent. But what caring says is, I just don't want you to be in pain. I know you're in pain, and I don't want you to have to be in pain. And you don't have to take in all of what somebody's feeling to not want them to be in pain. Right? Doctors have to do this every day. They have to go and try to help people and get them out of their pain without taking in the intensity of the emotion of who they're treating and their family members. Therapists have to do the same thing. We have to care about our clients and want them to not be in pain, but not fully resonate with everything they're going through, right? And so when you find that you're starting to get indifferent or callous or hardened, often it's because there's a little bit of a confusion, right? Or because there's stuff going on inside of us that we haven't dealt with that gets triggered by other people, and it feels overwhelming. These are kind of emotional landmines, right? So some people, there's a certain kind of news story that they can't read because that one's too much for me. Or for me, sometimes I'll be sitting with a client and they'll be telling a story and it'll remind me of some painful memory in my life that I haven't thought about in years and certainly never processed. And for a moment, I blink out because they've kind of put their finger on a little landmine inside of me that detonated. And for a moment, I cut out. Right? I'm just not there with them because there's something happening in me that's sort of too emotionally overwhelming. And usually if there's enough mindfulness, I kind of put that aside, get back in. But if we have a lot of stuff inside of us that's unprocessed, old wounds, old griefs, deep fears, tremendous shame, anything going on out here that gets that active in us is going to trigger that sort of empathetic overwhelm and make it really hard to care. We're going to shut down. And this is what depression is, right? Depression is when we want things in our life that are unresolved and the anxiety is building and building, and that anxiety gets to be so much that it overwhelms us and we just shut down. Depression is becoming indifferent to our own suffering, right? It's a protective mechanism. It's a way that the body just says, this is too much, I'm turning things down. So to recap, these are some of the things that get in the way of depression. Wanting things, right? Our desires, wanting to be safe, wanting to be happy, wanting to be well-loved, admired, respected. Our fears, not wanting to be in pain, not wanting to be overwhelmed by shame and grief and fear. And then all the little pockets of unprocessed emotions and fears and desires in us that we haven't seen that start to empathetically resonate with the world around us. These are the things that make it hard to care all the time. And to recap, the way to get out of it is to turn inwards. When we notice that we don't care, that we're indifferent, or when we notice that cruelty is arising, it's a gift because it lets us know that there's something in us that needs our own attention. You're not bad. You don't need to judge yourself. You don't need to go into a dark place of shame. Oh, I had a cruel thought. Oh, I'm indifferent. You just need to get curious. What do I want right now? What am I afraid of? What's this hitting in me that hurts, that's making it hard to wish this other person to be free of their pain? One more example from parenting for me, right? There's this kind of way that sometimes I will, and actually it's not just parenting, it can be in different relationships. I'll go cold. I'll just like, my face will kind of, it's like I put on a mask and I just like, I don't want to deal. And I might even say that, I don't want to deal. I don't want to know. I don't care. And I kind of turn away. And there's this moment where I'm walking away and I'm 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet, and I feel awful. Because on one hand, on the outside, I'm protecting myself from something that feels overwhelming. And on the inside, I'm in pain and I know everyone else is too, right? So it's a really wretched feeling. But if I can have this moment where I say, oh, I'm just so scared that they're going to miss the bus. I'm just so like worried that these other parents are judging me, right? Oh, it's so hard to watch them hurt each other, like beat the snot out of each other, right? That's painful. And then it's also painful to feel like I'm a bad parent because my kids are yelling at each other, right? All of those pains in me. If I can take a moment and notice all of that, and then that caring starts to infuse for the pain I'm feeling, then I can remember how much they're hurting, and I can turn around, I can walk back, and I can scoop them up, and we can fix things. And this takes practice again and again and again. And it takes specifically this collectedness and this mindfulness that we do here when we first sit down, right? And I invite you at the end of the meditation, see if you can keep this mindfulness and this collectedness going, because those are going to be the tools that get you out of that indifferent place or that cruel place or that place of ill will. They're going to catch that. They're going to say, the mindfulness is going to say, look at that. The mind is cruel right now. Welcome to your own cruelty. And the collectedness is going to allow you to look closely enough to really loosen those knots up. And that caring is going to suffuse your being, and you'll know just what to do with it when it does. So I'll stop there. I'll let that sink in for a moment. And I'm going to keep the recording on for the Q&A because people have said they find it helpful to be able to listen to it. Yeah, and if anybody has any questions or insights on the subject, I'd love to hear them.
It's two parts. I've never heard depression before described as indifference to your own suffering. And I wondered if you could elaborate on that. That's the first question.
Sure. So typically in my experience, depression is a response to anxiety, right? There's a way in which things are building in somebody's life. There's increased numbers of stressors that they're trying to deal with and cannot resolve. So chronic anxiety is building and building, or acute anxiety builds, right? Something is so big and so overwhelming. And the system has a natural way of shutting down. It doesn't get rid of the anxiety. It just puts kind of this gray, misty fog on top of it that can feel temporarily like a relief, right? It's like shutting the blinds to all the bad stuff going on outside, right? And so it's this pre-conscious indifference to what's happening inside of us because it feels a little bit better just to shut it down, to suppress it, to ignore it, to bury it, than to stay in that anxiety and in that tension of all these unresolved problems. And the way I find to help people out of depression is to sort of, instead of going right at the depression, just say, tell me about the things in your life that are stressing you out. Let's start to address the things that you were anxious about, because as you reduce some of that pressure, then it feels safe. And then interestingly, when people come out of depression, they usually jump back into really intense anxiety, right? And then you start to work with that. And so that's what I mean when I talk about it as a indifference to your own suffering.
I guess I wouldn't have used the word indifference. It's more of a, well, it doesn't matter. I understand what
You
you
get my
said.
point. Yeah.
The other thing was, and it actually happened to me today, someone I care a lot about, I hadn't talked to for a while, and this person's in a lot of suffering right now. And there is that caring, and then I flip into wanting to help. And just listening to you, I was thinking, well, what options did I have rather than saying, how can I help? And would this kind of thing help? Would that kind of, that's sort of what my default is, rather than just, and I don't know if this is, I'm just sort of processing that, saying I care, and then what? Because there's that instinct to like lean in. And do you have any comments about, okay, so you care, and then what? If anything, is that enough?
Yeah. So I thought about actually putting a whole section of the talk on wanting to help. And I'm glad you asked, because wanting to help is really interesting. It's not part of the limitless attitude, but it's not necessarily bad or good. Caring is just caring. Wanting to help sometimes arises because we're full of that caring. We see somebody suffering. We care that they're suffering. We see clearly an opportunity to alleviate that suffering, and it feels good to do so. There's no problem with that process, right? It can be a very natural, beautiful way of engaging with the world. It's lovely to help people. And there can be a way in which we see somebody suffering, but rather than feeling sort of a steady, solid wish for them not to suffer, we're actually empathetically overwhelmed by it. In that same way that might trigger indifference or cruelty, it's too much. I can't be with your suffering. I'm overwhelmed by how unhappy you are. So I need to fix it so that I can feel okay. Right? And you see, I mean, this is like a story with parents and children since the dawn of time, right? Like it can be too hard for a parent to watch their kid suffer, so they feel this compulsion to save their kid or fix their kid from whatever they're dealing with, because they can't be with their own discomfort around somebody else's suffering. That's that empathetic resonance piece. That's too much for me. And when the urge to fix it comes from that place, right? I can't stand watching you go through this hard time. Then it creates all kinds of problems. We get entangled in people's lives. We get confused about who's doing what for who, right? That's messy. You know, the old term codependence, I think, accurately kind of describes that. Does that speak to your question?
That's helpful. I think the what to be mindful of is the intention behind it. And is it coming from an open-heartedness, or is it coming from a compulsion? And
Right.
that's maybe that's the inquiry in a moment like that, is where am I with this?
And the good rule of thumb for me is that if it feels like an emergency that you have to fix, unless somebody's head is bleeding, it's probably coming from that empathetic resonance where you're overwhelmed and you're trying to fix something in yourself. But if it's something that doesn't arise as sort of an urgent tension, if it's something that arises as I wonder what we might do about this, you can trust that it's probably more of the other type, right? So things that feel like emergencies are to be distrusted as a general rule of thumb. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.